She thought she could control her bridesmaids until one of them exposed the truth. At her rehearsal dinner, she realized something terrifying. The woman who thought she could control her bridesmaids was about to face the bridesmaid who knew the truth and was no longer willing to stay quiet. Guests had arrived expecting soft music, polite toasts, and the calm before a wedding day. Instead, the room held a kind of tension that felt completely out of place for a celebration, like everyone was waiting for a storm they couldn't see yet. And, trust me, anyone standing close enough could feel the air change. Lily stepped forward from her table, holding a folded sheet of paper, not shaking, not hesitant, just steady, as if she'd been preparing for this moment longer than anyone knew. The chatter died instantly. Chairs shifted. Even the waitstaff froze. Every eye in the room followed her as she walked toward the center, toward the bride, toward the secret no one else had heard aloud. Honestly, she stayed calmer than I ever could. Lily unfolded the paper with slow, deliberate movements, the sound of the crease snapping echoing louder than it should. The bride blinked once, twice, barely breathing, as Lily lifted her gaze and spoke 4 words that sliced through the entire dinner. Everyone needs to hear this. A glass clinked somewhere in the back. Someone whispered a name. And then, just as Lily began to read the first line, the side door of the venue opened with a soft click, making half the room turn their heads. But to understand how she ended up here, we need to go back to the beginning. Before we begin, if you love stories that feel like they came straight out of a wedding group chat, subscribe now. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next twist. A few years earlier, Emma lived a life that looked simple from the outside: work, home, weekend errands, quiet dinners with her sister, the occasional night out when she convinced herself she needed fresh air. She wasn't the kind of woman who chased attention. If anything, she'd learned to stay small, to keep the peace, to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. According to what she'd tell people later, she genuinely believed love would come when she finally became enough. Enough for whom? She hadn't figured that out yet. Everything changed the day she met Daniel at a friend's birthday dinner. He had that polished charm people comment on in whispers, polite, attentive, confident in a way that made others lean in. He noticed her laugh before she noticed his smile, and by the end of the night, he had her number and a way of making her feel chosen. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, warm. The kind of attention she didn't think she still deserved. Between us, that's how control usually starts, quietly. Over the months, Daniel's presence grew into her routines. He praised her organization, her kindness, how she handled things calmly. And then, slowly, he began suggesting improvements, a different style of outfit, a more refined way of speaking at events, a comment here and there about how certain colors suited her more than others. Always wrapped in compliments, always sounding like he wanted the best for her. She didn't notice the pattern forming. But I'm telling you, people around them did. Still, Emma believed she was finally building something real. He introduced her to his family, who cared deeply about appearances, status, and reputation. They adored the idea of her, even before they took time to know her. And Emma, eager to fit in, tried her best. She worked harder, dressed the way they praised, and overlooked the small moments when Daniel's smile tightened if she didn't match the image he had in mind. Looking back, she would admit she ignored signs she shouldn't have, the comments disguised as jokes, the gentle corrections that didn't feel so gentle, the way Daniel's approval seemed to rise and fall depending on how she presented herself. But at that time, she only saw a future she didn't want to lose. Little did she know, this was only the opening act. The first real red flag came wrapped in one of Daniel's effortless smiles, the kind he used when he wanted something to sound harmless. They were getting ready for a dinner with his parents when he glanced at Emma's outfit and said, almost casually, "You look great, but maybe try something a bit more elegant next time. My mother notices these things." He kissed her cheek afterward, as if that softened the sting. Emma nodded, telling herself he meant well. But inside, a small, unfamiliar knot formed. His mother, of course, didn't help. During that same dinner, she examined Emma with a smile too polite to be sincere. "You're lovely," she said, "but you'd shine even more if you refined your style a little." Our family has a certain standard. She laughed lightly, sipping her wine, as though she'd offered a piece of helpful advice instead of drawing a line in the sand. And Emma, eager to belong, tried not to show how the comment hollowed her out. Between us, that woman knew exactly what she was doing. Little by little, comments like these became part of Emma's weekly life. Daniel suggesting a different hairstyle, that photographs better, his sister hinting that Emma should tone down her smile for formal events, his father remarking that presentation is everything. None of it sounded cruel out loud. But the message was clear: Emma had to earn her place in their world. And she tried. She truly tried. There were moments when she pushed back gently. Once, she told Daniel she liked her hair the way it was. He responded with a sigh and, "I just want us to look cohesive in photos. Don't get emotional, it's just practical." Another time, she wore an outfit she loved to meet his friends. He didn't say a word until they got home, where he calmly suggested she check Pinterest for inspiration next time. She laughed it off, though it sat with her all night. By then, Emma had begun to believe that every little choice she made reflected directly on Daniel. She felt herself shrinking without realizing it, adjusting, compromising, bending. The pressure came from all sides, and she learned to carry it quietly. What she didn't see, however, was that her bridesmaids would later become unwilling participants in that same pressure. But the worst was still ahead. It started subtly, the way most dangerous shifts do. One evening, after a long day at work, Emma arrived at Daniel's apartment to find him scrolling through photos of luxury weddings on his tablet. He didn't greet her with a kiss. He didn't even look up. He simply said, "This is the standard we're aiming for." The words weren't cruel, but the tone was firm, as if the expectation had been decided without her. Over the next weeks, the wedding became less about the two of them and more about maintaining an image he insisted was necessary. He brought up guest lists, table settings, lighting, outfits, even the way Emma should stand in photos. Every suggestion came with a comparison: a friend's wedding, a cousin's ceremony, a celebrity clip he'd saved because their aesthetic works. She felt the shift. He was no longer sharing dreams, he was assigning tasks. The first argument came when Daniel criticized a photo they took together at an engagement dinner. "You look tired," he said, frowning at the image on his phone. "Maybe try lighter makeup? Or something different with your hair." Emma tried to explain she'd come straight from work, exhausted, but he only shrugged. "You could try harder, that's all." Those 4 words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Another moment hit even harder. During a visit to his parents' house, his mother suggested, in front of several relatives, that Emma should consider losing just a little weight before the big day to match the rest of the family in photos. Emma felt her face burn, but Daniel didn't defend her. Instead, he gently squeezed her hand under the table, the silent signal he always used when he wanted her to behave. And she did. She smiled, swallowed the embarrassment, and changed the subject. By then, the idea of perfection wasn't just a theme, it was a requirement. Emma began internalizing it, thinking that if she didn't manage every detail flawlessly, Daniel's disappointment would be her fault. That fear sat on her shoulders every time she opened her wedding planner. And while she didn't know it yet, those seeds of insecurity were growing into something that would push her far past her limits and straight into the rules that would ignite everything. The moment everything snapped wasn't loud. It never is, not at first. It began during a family dinner Daniel organized to finalize wedding details. Emma arrived early, hands slightly trembling as she smoothed the front of her dress, a habit she'd picked up whenever she needed to steady herself. She'd spent the afternoon practicing how to present her bridesmaid plan, hoping it would sound reasonable once she said it out loud. Daniel didn't notice her nerves. He barely glanced at her when she sat beside him. His attention was on a seating chart he'd printed, tapping his finger on one spot, as if the paper itself were misbehaving. "We can't put your coworkers near my uncle's side," he murmured. "They don't match the aesthetic." Emma swallowed, nodding, even though the words made her stomach tighten. She kept her voice soft. "I think they'll be okay anywhere." He only sighed long, frustrated, the kind of exhale that made her shrink. Dinner started politely enough. Dishes clinked. Small conversations overlapped. But halfway through, his mother leaned forward with that careful smile she always used before delivering something cutting. "Emma, dear," she began, tilting her head, "I saw the photo Lily posted. She's lovely, but is she the right fit as a bridesmaid?" Emma froze, fingers tightening around her fork. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. His mother lifted her shoulders in a delicate shrug. "Just wondering if everyone in your party aligns visually. Weddings are forever in photos, you know." Daniel didn't object. In fact, he nodded just once, but enough to make Emma's breath hitch. She felt heat rise behind her eyes. She stared down at her plate, focusing on the steam rising from the food so she wouldn't look as shaken as she felt. A moment later, his sister chimed in, swirling her wine. "And what about the dress colors? You'll want something flattering for the whole group. Some tones aren't forgiving." Emma pressed her lips together, pulse quickening. She could feel her hands trembling beneath the table. Then came the moment that cracked something inside her. Daniel reached for her arm, not gently, and said, "Mom is right. We can't have distractions at the altar. People should be looking at us." The word distractions hit her like ice water. She laughed awkwardly, but it came out too thin, too tight. "They're my friends," she whispered. "They're beautiful." Daniel gave a half smile, the condescending kind that pretends to be affectionate. "Of course they are. But this is our day. You want everything perfect, don't you?" Emma's throat closed. She nodded because saying no would have caused a scene, and she'd learned to avoid those at all costs. Around her, the table went quiet, waiting for her response. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a breath. "I want it perfect." And that was the answer they wanted. His mother nodded approvingly. Daniel relaxed. His sister smiled behind her glass. Emma sat there, heart pounding, realizing she'd just agreed to standards she could never meet, and worse, that they expected her bridesmaids to meet as well. It was in that fragile silence, surrounded by people who claimed to love her, that the idea of the rules began forming in her mind. Not out of pride, not out of ego, out of fear of disappointing them, fear of failing, fear of losing everything she'd worked so hard to hold together. And from that moment on, every mistake they warned her about became her responsibility to fix. Emma didn't go home after that dinner. She couldn't. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow, and every word that had been spoken around that table replayed in her mind like a recording she couldn't shut off. She walked aimlessly for a while, heels tapping against the pavement, arms wrapped around herself despite the warm night air. When her phone buzzed, she didn't even check the screen, she just answered. "Are you okay?" It was Lily. Emma didn't know how Lily always sensed things, but she felt something loosen in her throat the moment she heard her voice. I didn't want to go home," Emma whispered, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand before the tear even fell. She hated crying in public. "Can I come over?" "Of course." Doors open. When Emma arrived, Lily was waiting on the couch with a blanket draped over her lap and 2 mugs of tea on the table. No questions, no pressure, just space. Emma sat down slowly, tugging at the sleeves of her cardigan. Her hands were shaking again, and Lily noticed. She didn't call attention to it. She simply pushed one of the mugs toward her. "Drink. You're freezing." After a long silence, Emma finally spoke. "I think I messed everything up." Her voice cracked on the last word. Lily turned toward her, eyebrows drawing together. "What happened?" Emma looked down into her tea, watching steam swirl upward like tiny ghosts. "Daniel's family, they think I'm not good enough. That I'm not polished enough." "And Daniel," she hesitated, swallowing hard. "He agrees with them. He says he just wants everything perfect." Lily's expression softened, but she didn't rush to comfort her. "Emma, what did they say?" Emma recounted the comments, the dress, the hair, the weight, the bridesmaids being a distraction. Her voice grew tighter with each detail, her breaths quicker. When she finished, Lily sat back, exhaling slowly. "That's not concern," she said quietly. "That's control." Emma shook her head instantly. No, he's not like that. He's stressed. It's the wedding. And I should try harder. I should make things easier for him. Lily let her talk, but her jaw clenched. Trying harder doesn't mean disappearing, Emma. Emma closed her eyes. Maybe if I make everything perfect, if everything looks right, they'll stop criticizing me. She said it with a fragile hope, the kind that hurts to hear. That's when Lily leaned forward, placing a steady hand on her arm. You're not the problem, she said. And you don't need to fix what isn't yours to carry. Emma's eyes filled, but she didn't cry, not yet. She looked away, voice almost a whisper. It's easier to believe it's my fault than to accept that he might not love me the way I thought. Lily didn't argue. She simply stayed beside her, letting the silence settle into something safer. For the first time that night, Emma exhaled without shaking. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything inside her started shifting, the moment she'd stop trying to earn love and begin searching for the truth behind the pain she'd been ignoring. And somewhere deep down, Lily knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of Emma learning she deserved better. Emma didn't wake up with clarity the next morning, but she did wake up with a different kind of ache. Not the sharp sting of shame from the dinner, but a low, steady hum of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months: doubt. She sat on the edge of Lily's guest bed, fingers tracing the seam of the blanket, trying to steady her breathing. Lily knocked lightly on the door. Breakfast, she said. And, before you panic, no, I didn't invite anyone else. They ate quietly at first, Emma picking at toast, Lily watching her with the patience of someone who knew pushing too soon would make everything collapse. Eventually, Emma set her fork down. Do you think I'm exaggerating? She asked. Do you think I'm overreacting? Lily leaned back in her chair. Do you? The question left Emma blinking. I don't know, she whispered. I feel like I've lost track of what's normal. Lily didn't hesitate. Then let's find out what actually happened. She grabbed her phone and opened Emma's messages, the ones Emma was too afraid to reread alone. Start here, Lily said gently. Look at his words. Not the way you explain them to yourself. Emma hesitated, then nodded. They scrolled through months of conversations, subtle digs disguised as advice, comparisons to other women, reminders to maintain standards, comments on her weight, her hair, her tone, her posture. Emma's chest tightened with each line. I didn't realize, her voice cracked. I thought he was helping me be better. Lily set the phone down. Emma, she said softly, you need to know this. Nothing is wrong with you. Emma's eyes filled instantly. This time she didn't look away. She let the words land heavy, unfamiliar, almost unbelievable. Her hands trembled, and Lily reached out, steadying them. There's a name for this, Lily continued. What he's been doing. It's called emotional manipulation. And you don't have to face it alone. The next step was harder. Emma agreed, with considerable hesitation, to speak to a therapist Lily trusted. The appointment was quiet, professional, calm. The therapist listened, asked questions, and never once made Emma feel foolish. Halfway through, she asked Emma to describe a moment when she felt she had to change something about herself to avoid disappointing Daniel. Emma described a dozen without realizing it. The therapist nodded, not with judgment but with clarity. You're carrying blame that isn't yours, she said gently. You've been conditioned to believe you must earn safety through perfection. Emma blinked, stunned. So I'm not broken? No, the therapist replied. You're exhausted. After the session, Lily drove them to a quiet overlook outside the city. They sat in the car, watching clouds move across the sky. Emma exhaled a long, shaky breath. I don't know what to do, she admitted. Everything feels tangled. Lily rested her head against the seat. Then we untangle it, bit by bit. And when you're ready, you'll know what to do with the truth. But the truth wasn't done revealing itself. That evening, Emma checked an old folder in her email, the one she usually ignored, and found something she didn't expect, a recording she'd forgotten she'd made during one of Daniel's jokes about her appearance that had left her crying in her car afterward. Hearing his voice again, sharp and dismissive, made her skin prickle. She covered her mouth with her hand, breath unsteady. And that was the moment she realized. She had evidence, not just feelings. Evidence she never planned to use. But evidence Lily knew would matter more than Emma could imagine. The days that followed didn't bring instant strength. They brought exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones after months of pretending everything is fine. But for the first time, Emma let herself slow down. She stepped back from wedding planning, from constant texting, from trying to anticipate every shift in Daniel's tone. She needed space, and she took it quietly. She returned to her apartment and began cleaning in small, careful motions. Folding clothes. Sorting papers. Lighting candles without knowing why. It wasn't about organizing the space, it was about calming her mind. She played soft music, opened windows, and let silence fill the places where anxiety used to live. She didn't call Daniel. He sent 3 messages. "Where are you? We need to talk. You're being dramatic." She didn't answer any of them. Her hands trembled each time the screen lit up, but she set the phone face down and kept breathing through the tightness in her chest. Therapy became routine, twice a week at first, then once, then a text check-in when she wasn't ready to speak out loud. She learned how to recognize patterns she thought were normal, the apologies that weren't apologies, the expectations disguised as love, the way she adapted herself to fit spaces that were never designed for her. She cried during some sessions, sat silent in others, but always left feeling just a little less lost. Healing isn't loud, the therapist told her. Sometimes it's simply choosing yourself in the smallest ways. Slowly, Emma returned to the parts of her life she had abandoned. She went back to her favorite cafe, the one she'd stopped visiting because Daniel said the pastries were unnecessary calories. She ordered the pastry anyway, ate it slowly, and felt something warm settle in her chest. She started jogging again, not to lose weight, but to hear her own breath in a rhythm that didn't belong to anyone else. She even signed up for a weekend workshop on digital design, something she'd always wanted to try. Her shoulders loosened little by little, like she was learning how to live in her own body again. Meanwhile, tiny shifts began happening around her. Coworkers who once saw her distracted now noticed her laughing more, not loudly, not constantly, but genuinely. Friends commented on how her voice sounded steadier when she talked about her future. Even Lily, who had been bracing herself for Emma to collapse again, found herself smiling whenever Emma shared something small she'd done for herself. It wasn't a transformation. It was a quiet resurrection. But the biggest change came one morning when Emma looked at her reflection, not to critique, not to adjust, but simply to see herself. She touched her own face lightly, imagining the pressure she had been under for so long. "I'm not who they told me I was," she whispered. The words shook, but they were real. And for the first time in months, Emma felt like she had a life to rebuild, not for a wedding, not for a man, not for approval, but for herself. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even interest at first sight. It was something quieter, a small shift she almost missed. Emma was sitting at her favorite cafe, sketching ideas from her design workshop, when someone approached her table with a hesitant smile. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. His voice was calm, warm in a way that didn't demand anything from her. She looked up and recognized him, Mark, a friend of a coworker she'd met once at an office gathering months earlier. Back then, she barely noticed him. Her mind had been buried under Daniel's expectations. Now, he felt like a familiar face she didn't have to perform for. "Go ahead," she said softly, gesturing to the empty chair. Their conversation started casually, weekend plans, work, the course she'd been taking. But something about the way he listened caught her off guard. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions, didn't tilt his head with judgment disguised as concern. He simply listened, nodding, occasionally asking gentle questions that made her feel seen rather than corrected. At one point, she realized her shoulders weren't tense. She wasn't choosing her words carefully. She was just talking. Over the next weeks, they crossed paths again at the cafe, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes deliberately. They walked in the park once after both finishing their drinks, talking about hobbies, childhood memories, music. There were pauses, but not the kind that made Emma anxious. These pauses felt natural, like breath between thoughts. She told him once, with a small laugh, Silence used to scare me. Mark looked at her kindly. Silence isn't punishment, he said. It's just space. She carried that line with her for days. Still, Emma approached everything carefully. She wasn't ready for big gestures or promises. Her heart was still tender, still healing. Mark seemed to sense that intuitively. He never pushed, never assumed, never asked for more than she could give. He simply made room, space she didn't realize she needed so badly. Once, as they stood outside the cafe under a soft drizzle, he offered her his umbrella. She hesitated, and he smiled. "You can say no," he said gently. And for the first time in her life, she believed she had that choice. Lily noticed the change before Emma did. One evening, as they sat on the couch reviewing design ideas, Emma mentioned Mark offhandedly, how thoughtful he was, how steady he felt. Lily paused, watching her friend closely. "You smile differently when you say his name." Emma blushed immediately, covering her face with her hands. "It's not like that." Lily raised an eyebrow. "I didn't say it was like anything. I'm just saying, you seem lighter when you talk about him." Emma didn't deny it, not fully. Because somewhere in the quiet moments with Mark, she realized she wasn't searching for someone new. She was rediscovering herself in the presence of someone who didn't demand perfection. Someone who didn't make her shrink or tighten or second-guess every breath she took. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe in someone else's company. And that safety, that softness, was exactly what she needed to face what was coming, because closure has a way of arriving right when you've finally found your footing again. Emma's life didn't change overnight, but it changed with intention. Weeks turned into months, and for the first time in years, she felt her energy returning piece by piece. She poured herself into her design work, not as an escape, but as something she genuinely enjoyed. What started as a weekend workshop grew into a small portfolio, color studies, invitations, event layouts, even a few branding mock-ups. Creating things gave her a sense of control that wasn't built on fear. One afternoon, on a whim and with Lily's gentle encouragement, Emma submitted some of her pieces to a local design contest. She didn't expect anything. She almost forgot she'd even entered. So when an email arrived a month later with the subject line, "Congratulations," she had to blink several times before she believed it. She was selected as one of the finalists, not because she catered to someone else's idea of perfection, but because her work had heart. Real, honest heart. The recognition didn't stop there. A small boutique event planner reached out, intrigued by her portfolio. "Would you be open to collaborating?" the message read. Emma stared at it in disbelief, hand pressed to her chest. She'd spent years trying to mold herself into someone else's expectations, and now, opportunities were coming because of who she was all along. Mark celebrated with her quietly, respectfully. He brought her a bouquet, not of roses, which Daniel used to buy as proof of romance, but of wildflowers. Simple, colorful, imperfect in the best way. "You earned this," he said softly. Emma looked at him, truly looked, and felt something steady warm in her chest. She wasn't rushing anything. But she wasn't scared anymore either. The biggest turning point came unexpectedly. Emma received a message from a former coworker, someone she barely kept in touch with. "Saw your work featured in the Design Expo's newsletter. Proud of you." Emma clicked the link, and there it was, her name, her art, her story summarized in a small paragraph. She read it twice, her throat tightening. It wasn't just success. It was validation. Proof she wasn't the fragile, inadequate woman Daniel tried to shape her into. Her therapist noticed the change as well. "Your voice is different now," she said during one session. "You speak from a place of ownership, not fear." Emma smiled, a little shyly. "I'm starting to believe I deserve things, good things." But the real miracle, the one she didn't see coming, was internal. She woke up one morning, stretched, and realized she hadn't thought about Daniel's approval in weeks. Not once. The silence where his voice used to echo was finally empty, and it felt like freedom. This newfound confidence wasn't just healing. It was preparation. Because the universe has a way of bringing everything full circle. And soon, Emma would face the people who broke her confidence, with a strength they never expected. While Emma's world slowly grew brighter, Daniel's began to dim, though he would never admit it out loud. At first, he acted as though her silence were a temporary inconvenience. He complained to friends that Emma was being overly sensitive and needed space to calm down. For a while, people nodded, believing the polished version of events he offered. But polished stories crumble fast when the truth leaks through the cracks. The first crack came from his own circle. A mutual acquaintance mentioned, too casually over drinks, that Daniel had been particularly demanding at work, snapping at colleagues, arriving late to meetings, correcting people in tones he once reserved only for Emma. "He's becoming unbearable," someone said. "Always tense. Always criticizing." Another coworker added, "Ever since his fiancée stepped back, he's been spiraling." Daniel brushed the comments off, but they lingered. He wasn't used to being called out. Then came the family tensions. Without Emma around to absorb their criticism, the pressure turned inward. At a dinner, his mother made a passive remark about Daniel looking tired in recent photos. His sister criticized his outfits, saying they lacked the style Emma used to bring out in him. For the first time, the mirror they forced on Emma swung back toward them. Daniel clenched his jaw, barely masking the irritation. He muttered something about Emma abandoning responsibility, but even his father raised an eyebrow. "If she left, maybe you should consider why," he said. Daniel didn't have an answer. Meanwhile, the wedding vendors began backing out. Without Emma coordinating, details slipped through the cracks, payments late, calls missed, schedules miscommunicated. One planner finally told Daniel, "You can't run a wedding by control alone. Someone has to care." The irony stung, though he'd never admit it. When he mentioned the issues at home, his mother suggested postponing the ceremony until Emma comes to her senses. His sister disagreed, insisting Emma's behavior proved she wasn't dependable. Voices escalated. Fingers pointed. Walls that once stood united began to fracture. Privately, Daniel tried reaching Emma again. At first gently, "We just need to talk." Then impatiently, "You're making this bigger than it is." And finally, almost angry, "If you don't fix this, people will assume the problem is you." Emma didn't answer. Each silence from her cracked something inside him, not out of love, but out of losing control over a narrative he thought he owned. Rumors started forming. Friends whispered that maybe Emma had been pressured too much. Maybe Daniel had crossed lines. Maybe they hadn't known the full story. Tiny doubts spread, and Daniel felt the ground shifting beneath him. He'd spent years crafting an image of composure, charm, perfection. But without Emma absorbing the blows, his edges showed sharp, impatient, brittle. And as Emma began rising in her own life, Daniel found himself sinking slowly, steadily, inevitably. Not because Emma exposed him, but because he'd relied on her silence for too long. Soon, they would stand in the same room again, no further illusions, no filtered truths, and the difference between them would be impossible to ignore. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked neatly into Emma's mailbox, a cream-colored envelope embossed with a family crest she knew all too well. For a moment, she simply held it, thumb brushing the edge, feeling the faint tremor in her chest. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she walked inside, set her keys down, and stared at the envelope like it held a ghost from her past. When she finally slid it open, her breath hitched. Daniel's family was hosting a private dinner, a reconciliation gathering, according to the elegant script, and Emma was invited. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about control, appearance, narrative. They wanted her there so they could present the breakup as mutual, civilized, uncomplicated. A clean story to protect their reputation. Emma sat at her kitchen counter, invitation in hand, heartbeat steadying as clarity settled over her. She didn't owe them a performance. She didn't owe them politeness. She certainly didn't owe them an explanation. But she did owe something to herself. Closure. Real closure. The kind found not by running away, but by walking into the room with your head high and walking out on your own terms. When she told Lily about the event, Lily leaned back on the couch and raised an eyebrow. "They want to save face," she said. "Of course," Emma replied. But I'm not going for them. After a pause, Lily nodded. Then go strong. They planned details quietly, not out of pettiness, but dignity. What Emma would wear, how she would arrive, the boundaries she'd keep. There was no anger in her preparation, only calm. On the evening of the event, Emma stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the fabric of her dress with deliberate, steady movements. Her reflection looked different, not styled for approval, not arranged for someone else's comfort. Just her. Whole. Grounded. She adjusted her necklace, took a slow breath, and whispered, "This is my story too." When she stepped into the venue, conversations softened. Heads turned. The lighting shimmered gently across the room, catching the polished glass and silverware arranged with meticulous care, exactly the kind of aesthetic Daniel's family adored. Daniel was near the front, straightening his cufflinks, pretending not to react. But his eyes flicked toward her, widening just enough to reveal surprise. His mother approached first, smile tight. "Emma, darling. We're so glad you came." Emma nodded politely. "I won't stay long," she said calmly. That alone unsettled them, her composure, her boundaries, her lack of apology. The room filled slowly. Soft music played. People murmured greetings. Daniel hovered at a distance, clearly rehearsing what he wanted to say. Emma could read the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped lightly against his glass. He wanted control back, and he didn't have it. When the family asked Emma to join them at the front for a word, she didn't resist. She stepped forward with measured grace, her posture steady, her breathing even. This was the room where her confidence once crumbled. Tonight, it would not. "Thank you all for being here," Daniel's mother began, projecting warm authority. "We'd like to clarify some misunderstandings," but the sentence never reached its end. The room's sliding doors opened, the same soft click from the rehearsal dinner, and every head turned. Lily stepped inside, calm as ever, carrying something small in her hand. And just like that, the moment brought Emma full circle, the beginning meeting the present, truth hovering in the space between silence and revelation. Lily didn't rush. She walked into the room with the kind of quiet confidence that draws every gaze without demanding it. Her heels clicked softly across the polished floor as she approached the front, eyes steady, posture calm. Daniel stiffened immediately. His mother's smile faltered. His sister looked from Lily to Emma as though trying to piece together a puzzle missing half its edges. Emma's breath wavered for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of déjà vu. The first time Lily stepped into a room like this, she had been holding the folded list of rules Emma wrote while drowning in fear. Tonight, she held something else entirely, the truth Emma had spent months believing she imagined. "Lily," Daniel said sharply, trying to regain control, "this is a family gathering." Lily stopped in front of him, expression unbothered. Perfect timing then. She turned to Emma, giving her a small nod, a question and a reassurance in one. Emma nodded back. She was ready. Daniel's mother attempted to smooth the tension with a brittle laugh. "Well, I'm sure whatever this is can wait." "No," Lily said softly, "it really can't." The room fell silent, every conversation dropping away like curtains falling mid-performance. Lily raised the small device in her hand, a phone, the screen dim but unmistakable. Emma recognized it instantly. It was the recording she rediscovered months ago. The one she never planned to use. The one she once believed was proof of her own failure. Lily looked at the family, then at the guests, and finally at Daniel. "You told everyone Emma ruined the wedding," she began. "You told people she was unstable, dramatic, difficult. You let your whole family criticize her, mock her, push her to fit your standards. But you never told them what you said behind closed doors." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't start." "Then say it's not your voice," Lily replied, her tone still gentle, almost painfully so. "Say it's not you. Say Emma made it all up." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel's mother's eyes darted to her son, then back to Lily. "What is this about?" she demanded. Lily pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, unmistakable, clear, cutting. "You're lucky I even want to marry you. Try to look thinner this week. People notice. Just fix yourself, Emma. You're embarrassing me. If you can't keep up, maybe you're not the right person to stand next to me. Gasps erupted. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's face drained of color. His mother reached for his arm, but he stepped back, stunned. Emma didn't look at him. She kept her gaze steady, shoulders squared, refusing to shrink the way she once would have. When the recording ended, silence pressed down like a held breath. Emma finally spoke, softly, but with a clarity that carried across the room. "I didn't create those rules because I wanted control," she said. "I created them because I was terrified. Terrified of not being enough. Terrified of disappointing him. Terrified of losing a future I thought I needed." Several guests lowered their eyes. A few looked furious on her behalf. Emma continued, "I blamed myself for everything. I thought if I could just make the wedding perfect, he wouldn't talk to me like that anymore." Her voice wavered, but she didn't break. "But perfection was never the problem. I just wasn't allowed to be human." Daniel finally found his voice. "Emma, let's talk in private." "No," she said, meeting his eyes with steady resolve. "No more privacy. Not after what you turned it into." His sister whispered to their mother, who stood rigid, face pale. The family that once demanded flawlessness now stood exposed in their own silence. Emma stepped back, letting the weight of the truth settle. "I'm not here to punish you," she said. "I'm here to end the story the right way." Lily moved beside her, offering silent support, no dramatics, just presence. And in that room filled with polished silverware, curated decor, and people who once doubted her, Emma stood taller than she ever had. Tonight, the truth didn't just come out. It echoed. Emma didn't wait for applause, questions, or explanations. As soon as the truth settled over the room, heavy, undeniable, irreversible, she turned to Lily and gave a small nod. Together, they stepped off the small platform and walked toward the exit. Conversations erupted behind them, some hushed, some incredulous, some angry. But Emma didn't look back. She didn't need to. The weight she'd carried for months had already fallen from her shoulders. The moment the doors closed behind them, the night air wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Emma took a slow breath, deep, steady, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. Her hands were still shaking a little, not from fear, but from release. Lily squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did it," she murmured. Emma nodded, eyes glistening. "I finally did." They walked a few steps before Emma paused, leaning against the railing outside the venue. The sky was dark, dotted with faint stars that peeked through the city haze. She let her head fall back, exhaling in a long, trembling sigh. "It's strange," she said softly. "I spent so long terrified of them. And now, it feels like they're not even part of my life anymore." "They aren't," Lily said. "They pretended to be your foundation, but all they ever did was hollow you out. You built yourself back." Inside the venue, voices escalated, Daniel's mother blaming him, his sister demanding answers, Daniel insisting the recording was taken out of context, though even he didn't sound convinced. The family fractured in the same way they once fractured Emma's confidence. But the door was closed now. That chaos no longer belonged to her. A few minutes later, the soft sound of footsteps approached. Emma straightened, expecting a furious family member. Instead, she saw Mark standing near the entrance, hands tucked in his pockets, expression gentle. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't overwhelm her with questions. He simply took one look at her, then at Lily, and quietly asked, "Do you want to go home?" Emma hesitated. Not because she was unsure of the answer, but because the simplicity of the question made something warm rise in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. Mark nodded once, offering his arm. She took it, not because she needed help standing, but because it felt safe to lean. As they walked to the car, Emma glanced back at the building, the glowing windows, the muffled voices, the past she had faced once and for all. "I thought closure would feel loud," she murmured. "Messy. Dramatic." Mark opened the passenger door for her. "Sometimes closure is just peace finally taking its place." On the ride home, she rested her head against the window, watching the city blur past. Her phone buzzed once, Daniel. She didn't open the message. She didn't need to. She turned the screen off and set it aside, breathing in the quiet. After a moment, she said, I don't hate him. Mark glanced at her gently. You don't have to. Emma nodded, voice barely above a whisper. I just don't belong there anymore. Lily followed behind them in her own car, making sure Emma wasn't alone until the very last moment. When they arrived at Emma's apartment, Lily hugged her tightly. You start a new chapter now, she said, pulling back to look her in the eyes. Not for anyone else. For you. Emma stood at her doorway after they left, hand resting lightly on the frame, letting the quiet night settle around her. Inside, the warm glow of her living room invited her in like a promise. She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, not as an ending, but as a beginning. No fear. No perfection to chase. No voices telling her she wasn't enough. Just Emma. Finally whole. Emma didn't expect to sleep well that night, but she did deeply, peacefully, without the heaviness that once lived in her chest. When morning sunlight filtered through her curtains, she woke slowly, stretching beneath soft blankets, her breath steady. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was waking up into someone else's expectations. She belonged only to herself now. Later that afternoon, Emma met Lily at their favorite cafe. The place was warm, filled with soft chatter and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Emma held her cup with both hands, letting the warmth soak into her skin. Lily watched her closely, studying her with quiet pride. You look lighter, she said. Emma smiled. I feel lighter. Their conversation drifted between laughter, future plans, and small memories that once felt painful but now felt distant, almost like stories from another life. Emma wasn't trying to forget. She was simply seeing everything with new clarity, not from the middle of the storm, but from solid ground. At one point, Lily leaned forward. You know, last night took strength most people never find. Emma shook her head. Last night took truth. You brought that truth in with you. Lily squeezed her hand gently. You were the one who spoke it. Across the cafe, Emma noticed Mark arriving. He spotted them, lifted a hand in greeting, and walked over with that soft, steady presence she'd come to rely on. He didn't ask how she was. He looked at her expression, her posture, her eyes, and he simply understood. You look like someone who finally exhaled, he said. Emma laughed softly. I did. Later, as the afternoon light dimmed and people drifted out of the cafe, Emma found herself staring at the window's reflection, her own face framed by the warm glow behind her. She barely recognized the woman she had been months ago. Do you think it's strange, she said quietly, that I don't feel angry anymore? Mark shook his head. Not strange. That's what healing looks like. Lily added, anger was never your destination. Freedom was. Emma's chest tightened, not with pain, but with gratitude. When they stepped outside, the street was glowing beneath soft golden lights. The world felt calm, open, expansive in a way Emma hadn't experienced before. She walked a few steps, then paused, letting the cool breeze brush against her skin. I thought facing them would break me, she said. But it felt like stepping out of a shadow. Lily smiled knowingly. Shadows only exist where something blocks the light. They stood there for a moment, the three of them, a small pocket of silence forming around them, not the tense silence Emma once feared, but a gentle one, filled with possibility. She looked at Lily. Thank you for not giving up on me. Lily shrugged lightly. You rescued yourself. I just turned on a lamp. Emma laughed, wiping the corner of her eye. Before they parted, Mark walked Emma to her car. She rested her hand on the door before opening it, turning toward him. I'm not ready for anything big, she said softly. I know, he replied. I'm not asking for anything big. He paused, searching her face. I'm just here. If you ever want me to be. His voice held no pressure, no expectation, only sincerity. Emma let out a slow breath, the kind you release when you realize you're finally safe. I like you here, she admitted. He smiled, a small, warm smile, then stepped back, giving her space to choose when to move. She opened the car door, but before getting in, she glanced over her shoulder, taking in the evening, the quiet street, the strange peace filling her chest. It felt like standing at the edge of a new beginning. And when she drove away, it wasn't an escape. It was a return to herself, to a life she wasn't afraid to live anymore, and to a future she would build with her own hands, one steady choice at a time. In the end, Emma didn't win by proving anyone wrong. She didn't win by fighting louder or hurting back. She won by stepping out of the version of herself that fear had built, the version shaped by someone else's expectations, someone else's standards, someone else's voice. Healing didn't arrive as thunder or applause. It arrived quietly, in the form of choices she made for herself, one by one, until the weight she had carried no longer belonged to her. Her story is a reminder that control often hides behind polished smiles and gentle suggestions, that love should never require disappearing, shrinking, or trading pieces of yourself for approval. True strength isn't found in perfection. It's found in honesty, in support, and in the courage to walk away from what dims your light. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is simply choose her own peace. And as Emma stepped into her new life, she proved something powerful. When you reclaim your voice, you reclaim your future. If you want more wedding drama, family secrets, and stories that make you whisper, "No way," hit subscribe. Bridal Confessions has many more secrets to tell.